Hello, I'm Laurel Thompson, and this is my project on the culture of Israel, or Israel as a culture. I'm going to be looking at my phone for my notes, but here we go. So here's just a map of Israel. So we have Jerusalem right here, which is kind of the main important place we'll be talking about. And then Gaza is also important, as you know, like the conflict in Israel, Gaza Strip, and other important places you can see on the map here. But just to let you know, it's located in the Mediterranean Sea, kind of more east, in the Middle East. So yeah, and then the cultural overview. So they have a low power distance, meaning that they treat each other as equals, and women can hold the same positions as men most of the time. This is evident in the military enlistment because everybody has to enlist. And then for uncertainty avoidance, considering how many enemies they have surrounding them, it's very high. They are an overly cautious society that plans to function well as a culture. Israel has a history of complex military operation that is known for its preemptive strategy and kind of other stuff like that, as well as just in general trying to do peace talks with other nations that they're struggling with. And then we have masculine, feminine. Their score was 47 or something on the scale. I think it's Herald scale or something like that. But that means there's no difference, but it's historically masculine. The shift kind of to be more stable comes from Israeli being a more multicultural society nowadays. There's been a flood of immigration since 1989, mostly from Soviet Russia and other European countries. There's a lot of anti-Semitism right now, unfortunately, so people are kind of just wanting to go back to the homeland. And then also, just to top that off, they kind of have business deals like the US. Time is money, they're trying to get stuff done. And then for collectivism / individualism, historically it's been collectivism, but nowadays, because of globalization and just kind of the change of the modern family, their focus is more on small families with parent-child relationships that extend to join the extended family. And then self-actualization is a strong ideal. Loyalty and responsibility are to each other, but communication is very direct. They don't really mess around. Jewish culture has a long history of traditions that have spanned generations, but like I said, because of just the change of the modern society, people are kind of going away from that, but some people are staying very strict to it, so there's kind of that back and forth there. And then traditional, non-traditional, it's modernly varied, but at the core very traditional, which we'll talk more about later. And then their time orientation is definitely past and the present. They are somewhat focused on the future, but it's more about the past in terms of culture and traditions. They're very rule oriented, at least Jewish people are, as far as trying to preserve certain traditions and kind of those morals and values that they have. And their view of nature is mastery / harmony. In the Bible in Genesis, they talk about how, God gave the land for them to have dominion over. And there's other verses, some say it's supposed to be complete mastery and that they're, can do whatever they want to the land, but the Bible points to more of a stewardess of the land. Okay, so now to talk about Jerusalem and kind of just the culture surrounding, or just the history surrounding Israel, especially Jerusalem, that has created like the modern conflicts today, but also just in general, like the importance of like the multicultural kind of aspect of Israel. So a good example of this is the Old City. They have the Jewish quarter, the Muslim quarter, the Christian quarter, and the Armenian quarter. Yeah, so this is just kind of them all coming together and living in peace. Here are some pictures of kind of important religious places. This is the Western Wall. People come here to like pray, especially like slipping pieces of paper there to in hopes that their prayers get answered. This is very important for Judaism, which is what I'll be focusing on more. Dome of the Rock is important to Muslims because this is where the Prophet Muhammad left Earth to visit Allah on a horse. It's very important historically, and also for Jews as well, because that's where Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac, but then didn't and gave him that promise. And then for Christians, we have Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Temple Mount is also just like in general an important holy place, but Church of Holy Sepulchre for Catholics and Christians is kind of the place where Jesus died and was buried. So then this is Jewish culture. We'll kind of dive more into that. They seek truth to create the norm. So they're very like oral speaking society. Generations, telling stories and passing it on to children. Some of their texts and important documents are the Ten Commandments, believe in one God, so they're monotheistic. And then we have sacred texts, which is the Torah, holy text / Bible. It has different books in it compared to the Christian Bible, because the Christian Bible has, New Testament in it, whereas this is more of the Old Testament. And then they also have Tanakh, which is the ancient collection of writings, just more of that cultural importance. And then we have the Talmud, recording of how to follow the Torah. And then we have three groups mostly in Judaism, and that's Orthodox Jews, Conservative Reform Jews, and Reform Jews. However, today, modern Israel is mostly secular. Some art and aesthetics. Some don't view Judaism as an overly artistic society, but it's mostly just focused on their religion, which is they have this little portable sanctuary called a Mishkan that's very beautiful, and it's central to kind of creation for them, or creativity I should say. Exquisite mosques, mosaics, and temples and synagogues all around the world. They're also literary geniuses with things like midrashim, a couple dances, but one is called the Hora. It's usually performed at weddings. Although they face a lot of persecution and exile and moving around to a lot of different places, they have a great way of celebrating life, which we'll get into here. There's celebrations and festivals. So Jewish people celebrate many religious holidays that have historical significance. Although some of these holidays are in remembrance of suffering, there's hope they find there. For example, we have Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, which people pray, fast, and it's actually coming up this week. I think it's today. And they ask God for forgiveness, and this is 10 days after Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, usually in September or October. Then we have Passover, celebrating the liberation of Jews from Egypt. I don't know if anyone knows that story, but Moses leads his people out of Egypt, and then they go into the desert, and then for 40 years they're there, and that's where they get the 10 Commandments. and this usually happens in the spring. Then we have Hanukkah, Festival of Lights in late November or December, as we know. And then Bar Bat Mitzvah, it's just a celebration marking like the 13th birthday. And then Shabbat, which begins sundown each Friday, ends. Basically, Israel is a changing society, so a lot of the stuff we talked about as far as the basis of their culture has been changing. Like, for example, you can't handle money on Shabbat, but like 55% of Israeli Jews say they handle money that day. And there's like a shift to become more stable due to their like multicultural society. So they're just trying to, build that up. So a lot of that tension is in this conflict, over this land, because it wasn't theirs at first with World War II and stuff like that. Deep dive on this as far as how it affects people mentally and the trauma involved. So a study done by the Routledge Group attempted to predict the impairments of post-traumatic stress-related impairment victims of terrorism and ongoing conflict in Israel. The result found that those who experience those impairments due to ongoing war and terror attacks are higher in those individuals just like who have overall PTSD. That meaning that these conflicts are creating, that generations are experiencing, are creating, mental health issues. I'll kind of just read what kind of an opinion piece had to say about this, but Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a sensor on one hand and a mirror on the other. They are more sensitive to the conflict and feel its influence on the smallest detail of their daily lives and reflect as a mirror how they envision this conflict and project into their attitudes and behavior. As a result, young people in both communities are becoming more extreme in their positions or apathetic due to the lack of contact and knowledge of the other. But, as we're saying, if we go on to this one, just having kind of like a connection, these generations may be more stressed and sensitive than previous. Furthermore, worsening conditions, like because of this, more Palestinians are taking their lives. And this is quite sad just because, this conflict has been going on for so long that I'm sure this younger generation is just exhausted and frustrated and not sure where to go from here. And I couldn't really find much about that as far as dealing with these issues. I know that there's a lot of initiatives for students to have peace talks, and I've seen a lot of that of people doing conflict resolution kind of therapy as far as trying to get them to see the same side. And then some are suggesting using biblical stories to prevent suicide and encourage a positive mindset. There's many incidents in the Bible where certain people want to take their lives or something of that matter, and God convinces them otherwise. I'm just trying to find hope in that. I think it could be important to reconnect to their culture, and as far as globalization goes, kind of understand more about who they are as people, which I'm sure they know, but I'm just saying to reconnect with that, and because things can get lost in translation, because international politics is very much influenced by Israel, but luckily this younger generation is taking advantage of this, so there's hope on both sides. Children on the opposite sides of the conflict have had more opportunities to interact with each other and begin to understand each other as people rather than as enemy. Therefore, the younger generation is challenging the conflict by searching for a solution together. Whether through music, art, or other platforms, they can reach the rest of the world with their discovery. So kind of just taking what they learn from those interactions and, sharing it with their parents, and just overall becoming more personable, with their enemy is gonna make it less separated like it is, because there's a lot of radicalization on either side, or just complete apathy. Because When you're like raised in that kind of situation, you either like fight, flight, or freeze, kind of like with PTSD and that trauma aspect of that. Like these kids, that's what they're living, every day. So kind of a conclusion, the world tends to judge Israel on its politics and conflicts without realizing they're like everyday people. I know that that's kind of my experience with Israel, but in reality they're just kind of everyday people like us. They have lives, they have celebrities, they have a lot more substance than I think that the media can kind of put them in sometimes. But due to globalization, this world is changing fast, and the basis to fix psychological issues is different for each culture. But overall, and then this is a graph of immigration in Israel, just going to show that, because of how many people are coming into Israel, it's changing fast. And then this is my bibliography. So, thank you so much!